Hi, my name is Manjin Kim, and today I want to talk about why I'm not a Christian. I've done a couple of other videos about spirituality in kind of a positive sense, stuff that I kind of agree with or sympathise with, and I want to do some videos now about things I disagree with, that I don't believe. I want to say that I'm not knocking anyone else's faith, that I'm not really into attacking other people for having a faith. Anything that gives your life meaning and allows you to become a better person is a good thing. I just want to basically share the reasons why I don't call myself a Christian in this video. Let me also say that I was raised Christian, so I do know a certain amount of what I'm talking about. I've read the Bible through a number of times, and I was raised as a Christian, and so I'm aware of the various ideas and viewpoints that often Christians have. And slowly, gradually through my life, I've come to reject certain ideas about Christianity, to the point, of course, where I could no longer call myself a Christian anyway. So these are the 7 reasons why I am not a Christian. Reason number 1 is the idea of a creator God. There are many types of God which I feel could, in theory, exist. I'm a bit of an agnostic. I've got an open mind about a number of different types of God that could exist, such as some kind of consciousness that evolves from within the universe due to the connections between the living beings that have consciousness. There might be some kind of construction of our overarching consciousness that kind of grows and evolves within the universe. This is something that could in theory be true, though there's not really much evidence for it. Or some kind of energy or power that kind of flows through all things. But these are ideas of God which are part of the universe. They're not separate from it, and quite importantly, are not creators or designers of the universe. And that's really the idea that is obviously there in the Bible, and obviously Christians subscribe to, that I don't agree with. I don't think the idea of a creator, designer kind of God really fits the scientific evidence. The evidence of science seems to suggest that there's a kind of incremental development of things. It starts off with simple things and then they progress to more and more complicated things. It wasn't just designed as is to start with, and there's a lot of evidence for this, and there's a lot of evidence for it being a fairly haphazard trial and error process. The obvious example of this is in evolution through natural selection, but I think the principle also sort of applies to the physical laws of the universe, especially when you come with the idea of the anthropic principle, that if there were universes where life could not evolve, or universes that couldn't continue to exist and would destroy themselves, that we wouldn't know about it. Obviously the one we exist in is one that gave rise to life, because we're here asking the question. If there were many universes, we'd only know about the ones that were capable of producing life anyway. Yeah, because basically there's this general principle which is there in natural selection as well. That which works continues to exist, that which doesn't ceases to be. And when you look particularly at biological evidence, it seems that that is the way things came about. The fossil record is there. There's a wealth of evidence, basically, scientific evidence that suggests that the universe evolved gradually from simpler things to more complex things, and through basically a system of trial and error. So the idea of a divine designer or a kind of creator God is actually contradictory to the scientific evidence, so that's not something I personally can accept as a possibility. Reason number 2 is the idea of the devil and the whole story about the fall of man. Firstly, the devil actually isn't in the Bible an awful lot. It's amazing that so many Christians believe in this thing when it's not actually in the Bible all that much. By the time of the New Testament, there was talk about the evil one, and certainly some of the later New Testament documents seem to really believe in a kind of devil figure. But throughout the Old Testament, there's really not a lot there. There's a Satan guy that occasionally pops up as an adversary to God, but seems to have a weird kind of arrangement with God anyway, as shown by the book of Job. So there's not a huge amount of evidence within the Bible for the idea of the devil. And there's also a real problem here about the origin of evil. I realised this when I was a child, actually. I often would ask if the devil tempted Adam and Eve into sin, and that's how we explain how a perfect creation, like the Adam and Eve, was able to go bad, then how do we explain how the devil, who was previously supposedly an angel, went bad? You know, who tempted the devil? And this is, I've often found it curious that you have these two stories about how something was made perfect but then turned bad. You have the devil one, and then you have the Adam and Eve one. And it seems that only one of those is necessary. With regard to there being a problem of the origin of evil, it's only if you think that in order for something perfect to go bad, there needs to be somebody tempting it astray. Well, that doesn't get you anywhere. You can't explain the origin of evil, because, like, if the devil tempted Adam and Eve, who tempted the devil? Who tempted that tempter? Etc., etc. So unless you believe evil was there all along, there's another way, though, that you can explain why something created perfect and good would go bad, and that's the idea of free will. If something has free will, then it can exercise that free will to rebel and go its own way against the will of God. And that's all you need to explain it. And if that's all you need to explain it, you don't need this idea of a devil. Adam and Eve, created perfect, they used their free will, but they had free will, they used their free will to rebel. That's all you need to explain evil within the biblical framework. So I don't get that. What's this devil thing? It seems more of a way we can have a cop-out, you know, evil's not the creation of human beings, it's the devil's fault. Well, that's kind of a bit rubbish, isn't it? And would seem contrary to the aims of any religion, which is helping people, encouraging people to be good and not to do bad things. Well, that's no good. If you've got a cop-out, the devil made me do it. So there's a very big problem with that idea. Plus, I think there's a big problem with the idea of evil in the way that Christianity and the Bible would frame it anyway. It seems a very simplistic and primitive idea, really, that all wrongdoing and sinfulness can be called evil. Obviously, people are capable of evil acts, like when they really choose to do something for pure sadistic pleasure of watching someone suffer and causing someone torment. Well, that, I think we can call that evil. But a lot of the wrongdoing that people do in the world is actually a result of acting on fear or acting on anger or just making the wrong choices. And I think this thing of lumping it all together as sin and evil and all the same is a very primitive, ignorant idea that shows a lack of understanding about the true nature of human nature and the true nature of human psychology. Reason number 3 I'm not a Christian is the whole idea of heaven and hell and judgment. It is a strange thing that this God apparently gave us free will, but then decides to judge us and condemn us for exercising it. I mean, this is the idea that Christians themselves say when they're dealing with the problem of evil. Why is there evil in the world if God is good? And they always come back to free will. If God doesn't want mindless automatons, he wants us to come to him from our own free will. Well, the problem with that is, in order to come to an understanding of goodness, in order to come to an understanding of the truth, in order to leave wrongdoing behind and come into a state of righteousness, you need first, I think, to make mistakes. You need to exercise your free will, make the mistakes, then learn better from them. It seems to me that is the most logical reason why a deity would give us free will, that we can learn ourselves. And then it seems rather strange that there would be this whole punishment thing about that. If it's an opportunity to learn better, then some kind of reincarnatory process would make more sense than this: you live once and if you fuck up you go to hell. And hell is not a just punishment. There is nothing just about eternal punishment, especially if the whole point of free will is to learn better. There needs to be some kind of rehabilitation, potential opportunity of rehabilitation anyway. Something basically off about the whole judgment, heaven and hell scenario. It doesn't seem very moral or just. And here's the other thing: it doesn't produce morality. If you do what you do out of fear of hell or hope for a reward in heaven, you're not acting through true morality. True morality would come as a result of love and compassion for your fellow human beings. That is the only reason to do good. If you do good for any other reason, you're not acting morally at all. You're acting out of self-interest. So there's something basically off with the whole notion. Reason 4 I'm not a Christian is the whole idea of the Incarnation. the whole idea of God becoming a human being. This, I feel, is logically faulty. Now, I've discussed this with Christians before, and a lot of them, particularly the more fundamentalist type of Christians, want to say, but God can do anything. But being able to create any situation doesn't mean you can create a situation that doesn't make sense itself, because it's not consistent with itself. There's a difference between something, as far as we know, not being possible, but if God could do anything, it could be possible, and something which doesn't make sense. It itself doesn't make sense. Then how can it be? God can only make a world that contradicts itself in order to make it happen. And so something can be a logical fallacy. I studied philosophy. This is known as the difference between a posteriori and a priori truths. Something can be impossible in this reality, but there might be another reality where it's possible. Other things are impossible full stop, because they don't even make sense. They're not even logically consistent. And that's what I'm talking about. The whole idea of the infinite becoming finite without somehow losing its infinity doesn't make sense. If the divine becomes a man, how can it do so without losing its divinity as well? Jesus had limited human knowledge. I doubt we can really say that Jesus, the man who walked on the earth according to the biblical history, knew about space travel or HIV or or the theory of relativity. He obviously had finite human intelligence. Well, there's something basically nonsensical to me about something divine and infinite becoming finite and limited and restricted in its power and in its knowledge. How can it do that without also not being divine anymore? There's a basic logical inconsistency in the very idea, I feel. Reason 5 why I'm not a Christian is the whole crucifixion atonement thing. This is weird, because God presumably realised that people weren't able to be good, that they always did wrong things, and thus couldn't get into heaven because of it, and he wanted to basically change this. He wanted to give people an ability to get into heaven. He wanted to be able to say, okay, if you say sorry for your sins, if you're repentant, then I'll forgive you. Why did he need to come down and die on the cross in order for that to happen? He's God. Surely he could say, okay, that's the new rules. If you come to me and are penitent, I'll forgive you, and then you can get into heaven. Job's done, right? Why the need for this weird gesture? And the other thing, it's kind of gruesome. It's a sacrifice. Basically, it's like we used to sacrifice animals to atone for our sins. Now, God has sent himself down as a man to die for our sins. There needs to be some gruesome blood sacrifice for God to allow himself to forgive people. It's weird. It's a very primitive idea, and it's kind of disgusting. I know there's this whole romanticization, lovely, sentimental idea that God took on the pains and sufferings that we all go through, so now he can understand what it's like to be human. God's supposed to be all-knowing, isn't he? Doesn't he already know? Is he some kind of imperfect being that needs to learn this by coming down and then going, oh, I see. Was it that he didn't decide he wanted to forgive people? He came down as a man for some other reason, and then because he suffered so much, he went, oh, I get it now, and so he became more lenient and forgiving. It's just an odd idea. Whatever way you look at it, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. There's no need for this grand gesture, unless it's so that we can understand that we're forgiven, so our guilt and feelings of unworthiness don't get in the way. But if that's the case, all there needs to be is a story saying that God did this. It doesn't need to literally happen. Hang on. This is a weird thing where actually it makes more sense as a myth. It makes more sense of human evolution in our understanding about morality and evolution of mankind's spirituality, that we came up with a new idea about who God must be, the way it is, not this harsh judge anymore, but someone more loving and compassionate and forgiving. It's even not perfect in the way it is in the New Testament, because it's still very conditional on us coming to God in the right way through the Christian religion and saying sorry, not just being sorry, or not just being forgiven, even though we don't realise that we made mistakes, because God is that compassionate that He understands the reason we made the mistakes. I can forgive people without them having to actually come and say sorry. And it seems strange to call God unconditionally loving when clearly it's massively conditional. A lot of these things seem to make more sense as when viewed as our faulty human understanding about spirituality than actually anything really true about any kind of God. Like the hell thing I spoke about actually just is more about our need for some kind of justice, some kind of revenge even for those who do wrong against us. But any God would be able to see the bigger picture. So, and the same with this crucifixion atonement idea. If God's forgiving, He's forgiving from the beginning of time. What's clearly happened here is the humans came up with a new story because they grew in understanding about the nature of morality and the nature of spirituality. Talking of things that might not be literally true, but more a kind of story, as humans evolved in their understanding of spirituality, leads me to the resurrection and to miracles in the Bible and to the issue of how historical the Bible is, which is my sixth reason I'm not a Christian. I can't believe in these miraculous stories as anything other than myths, and that includes the virgin birth, of course, and the resurrection. And this is a key, pivotal thing in the Christian story. Obviously, you're supposed to believe Jesus literally rose from the dead, and that for that reason we can all survive death now as well, in some kind of afterlife. The thing about the resurrection is the narratives in the Gospels are actually quite inconsistent. Each Gospel seems to have its own resurrection story, which is quite different to the others, which suggests to me straight away that something's a little bit off with this. Plus, a lot of those resurrection stories actually seem as if they're come from a more symbolic, mythical understanding of things. Why are you looking for the living amongst the dead? Phrases like this. There's all sorts of bits in the resurrection narratives that suggest that maybe this was more an understanding of how the divine message lives on, even though the man died. I don't know. Resurrection. A lot of Christians want to say that if the resurrection didn't literally happen, why were Christians so prepared to die for their beliefs if there wasn't actually a real truth behind it? The thing is, it's possible to die for all kinds of beliefs, and you don't have to believe them literally. This idea that the only form of truth is factual is a little bit flawed, because there can be all kinds of symbolic, metaphorical truths that people find worthwhile enough that they will still stand up and die for them. They obviously believed that there was something very important in the very message that they were preaching, and they were prepared to die for it. People will die for all kinds of beliefs. Beliefs can take many different forms, aren't always literal or factual anyway, but there's still something worthwhile that you're following that you might be prepared to stand up for and not compromise on, whatever the consequences. What really happened with that early church? I don't know. I think people formulated a new idea about God. I think they found it life-changing enough that they wanted to spread it with certain joy and vigour. And obviously if it was that important to them, then they would have stand up for it and not compromised their values and whatever the consequences. It doesn't take much for human beings to do that if they believe in something strongly enough. But yeah, I find it hard to believe that the Bible is that historically accurate. And not only because of miracles, there are actually parts of the Bible that don't fit historical facts. Some of the bits of the Old Testament seem to be not quite accurate to the reality as we know it from archaeology. But I'm not an expert on archaeology or on textual criticism, so those arguments are perhaps best conducted by other people. But the seventh reason why I'm not a Christian is Christian morality and biblical morality. The morality in the Bible is fairly suspect. I'm not going to go into details about this. A lot of atheists bang on about this, but there are some very dodgy things actually. When you actually read the Bible, it's not, by today's standards, it doesn't seem very moral at all. I think there was progress in terms of things like slavery. I think there was progress in terms of trying to be lenient and compassionate towards those who were kept as slaves. But the whole thing of slavery is never challenged in the Bible at all. There's this horrible thing that when a woman is raped, that she then has to marry her rapist. Great. Great for her, that is wonderful. And then there's the whole genocide of all the Canaanites and things like that. There's a lot of things in the Bible that are very morally suspect, actually. But even when a lot of Christians will say, oh, well, that was the moral understanding of the day and we've moved on since, it's the message of the spirituality that's important. But still today, Christians have some pretty messed up, backwards forms of morality that I think really do need to be challenged in today's world. They're often very conformist. They don't want to challenge or shake things up or attack the... I mean, there are even Bible passages to support this idea. You know, a government could be very corrupt and tyrannical, and yet they'd still say, well, you know, give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and, you know, keep your nose clean and conform, basically. I think there is a place for rebelling and protesting. There's a place for defying authorities when those authorities are wrong, and when the laws are oppressive and harmful to people. There's a lot of sexism in the Bible, not so much in churches these days, but it still rears its head from time to time, like the whole furor over women priests and women bishops. There's a lot of Bible passages as well that do basically entrench gender roles on men and on women, and some which even say women should know their place and know when to you know, to shut up and let the men do the talking about important matters like religion. It's that stuff is horrible. I really believe women and men should be equals. And there's this whole anti-gay thing. The Bible passages are there that are used, and possibly they're misused. Often they seem a bit unclear as to what they really meant, but it's a long tradition within Christianity of being very anti-LGBT, and that's not something I can stand for at all. And then there's all the anti-pagan things in the Bible. I understand that they were trying to have a clearer view about God rather than worshipping figurines. They wanted a wider, all-reaching God, more an abstract idea about God, perhaps. I understand that the Jews wanted to separate themselves from the nations around them during those formative years and everything, but still, some of the anti-pagan rhetoric in the Bible is pretty disgusting when you realise that, well, certainly by today's standards, what paganism means today, where there's often an understanding that the gods are symbolic. Obviously the figurines are just representations, they're not the god itself, and so on. There's a lot of basic ignorance there, and it's a problem with Christianity anyway, being fairly patronising and insulting towards other religions. I know there's a lot of attempts these days for religions to try and get along with each other, but Christianity has always had this thing of like, this is the one true way, so the other ones, they're lost and ignorant and not really following the way of the Lord. And I just think I'm more Hindu in my views. There are many paths to God. I think it's basically problematic in today's world as well, to claim that your religion has all the answers and the other ones are all totally false. I actually find a lot of other religions to have a lot of wisdom that is sadly lacking from the Christian faith, but there you are. These are just my opinions, though. They're just my reasons why I don't believe in Christianity, why I'm not a Christian, that I just thought I'd share with you. Thank you.